Just about everywhere on YouTube or on the news, everyone is talking about Japan's over-tourism.
Japan is one of the hottest travel destinations in the world right now.
Tourism is booming in Japan.
Swamped by millions of tourists.
Overseas tourists are back in force.
Japan is more popular than ever, and according to reports, you tourists are the problem.
Many areas are already starting to feel the strain.
We have a message for foreigners.
I want you to come back.
To quickly fill you in, we have to rewind a few years, and Japan had set a goal for 40 million visitors for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and 60 million by 2030. And we all know what happened when the whole world hit pause. Japan closed its borders in April 2020, and as a result, many hotels and the tourist industry that had gambled on the successful Olympics were left with no bookings, no foreign customers, and as a result of an exodus of foreign workers and students, a staffing problem. Japan's borders remained closed to the world for nearly 2.5 years, with only some specific groups allowed to enter, and after a failed North Korean-style controlled tourism experiment, Japan finally opened its borders on October 11th, 2022. Fast forward to today and a lot has changed. Japan welcomed 1 million more foreign visitors in the first half of 2024 compared to pre-pandemic levels, with most entering from South Korea, China and Taiwan. Popular sites have been flooded with crowds, leading to significant strains on infrastructure, longer wait times at attractions, and a surge in demand for accommodation and services. And Japan is still sticking to its 60 million goal. Gone are the complaints of no tourism and the plea for more visitors. I must admit that after spending countless hours researching and reflecting on the topic, I've changed my mind on multiple occasions, but always reached a similar conclusion. It's not just one problem, and it certainly isn't straightforward. So this is what is affecting tourism right now. Problem number 1. You are the problem. You litter, you are loud, you don't follow rules, and you are ruining Japan for the locals. This is how social media and the news can portray tourists. Because after all, if one foreigner with their face blurred on social media makes headlines, or a post goes viral, then obviously alarm bells ring. I'm talking about tourists kicking deer, not showing respect on trains, fighting, being disrespectful at shrines and temples, following geisha, and even swimming at tourist sites. Mix in some bad streamers and content creators making headlines for harassing people on trains, breaking and entering, and traveling on trains for free, and it's obvious the public opinion is going to be negative. We are talking about the worst of the worst. Hell, just talking about this makes my blood boil. But this is part of the problem. Social media is creating a mindset among some people in Japan that tourists generally are badly behaved, putting the spotlight on tourists when we all know that a lot of these incidents are one-offs and don't happen too often, and if they do, it's as a result of huge tourist foot traffic and at times lack of infrastructure. More on that later. A quick side note, consider using my affiliate links if you're traveling to Japan. You can not only get some great products like pocket Wi-Fi or data sims, but also book for attractions so that you can get ahead of the tourist crowds and not miss out, whilst at the same time helping the channel out. Anyway, back to the crowds. A recent poll actually shows that top complaints by Japanese locals are littering, taking photos where it's prohibited, speaking loudly in public, entering stores or trains whilst wet from the rain, not trying to speak Japanese or understand the rules, sitting on the street, failing to ask permission before certain actions, and ignoring Japanese customs and regulations. And I personally think that many of these are easy to follow and common sense, but I also think that tourists shouldn't be expected to read a rule book before entering Japan. Yes, don't be stupid, you shouldn't litter, but also where are the bins, where are the trash cans, especially around high foot traffic and popular locations. I know that locals take the trash home, but a tourist is more likely to produce more trash and therefore have to carry more trash with them than a local person. Expecting tourists to carry everything with them all day until they reach their hotels, which many times have tiny teeny bins or trash cans, is part of the problem. Yes, some locations are starting to improve in this area, and I'm not advocating for widespread trash cans, as I do think that tourists can carry their rubbish with them, to a certain point anyway, and that there are opportunities to dispose of trash. I do, but I simply don't see the point of not having trash cans at key locations for everyone's sanity. Why create a situation that's going to cause locals to complain, right? And although the majority of Japanese people don't litter, leading to some out of the way areas, and you'll find illegal tipping, piles of garbage in the streets, and no, this was not done by tourists. It's just hidden and not something that's generally spoken about. Sitting on the streets, yeah, I agree, it's unsightly and is considered rude in Japan, but this can be common practice in other parts of the world. Finding a place to sit can be difficult, and tourists might have been on their feet all day, and most sit without thinking, and not to be purposely disrespectful unless there is a specific sign, obviously. This one is a tricky one, and my thought is that unless a tourist is blocking a path or congregating in a large group, then maybe it's one to turn a blind eye on. What are your thoughts? You might be doing something wrong, but if you are not educated or you don't know. And when it comes to many of the other points, it's common sense. Don't disregard signs, ask permission before taking photos, read the room, because why would you want to stick out, guys? And learning some basic Japanese will really go a long way, which reminds me that I put together some great Japanese guides with my friend to help you out, so check them out. So the problem, the spotlight is on tourists, and where so many cultures and countries are entering with different norms and different expectations, it's easy to see how it can be a problem. Not all tourists are the same, but it sometimes feels that a few mistakes can quickly become a blanket punishment for all tourists, regardless of where they come from. Okay, problem number 2, the tourism misconception. Tourism is not just international. In 2019, Kyoto Prefecture welcomed around 87 million tourists, and although numbers are growing, this trend continues. The majority of tourists are domestic or from other Asian countries, and Western tourists make a smaller piece of the pie. So there is a misconception. It's not really just about Western visitors. Western visitors might just stand out more. When I travel around Japan, I hear a lot of Chinese and Korean, but my ears and my eyes automatically home into people speaking English or Spanish and other European countries that are familiar to me. Perhaps they just stand out. Problem number 3, crowds. I'm not going to pretend that certain parts of Japan don't have a crowd problem. The majority of tourists stick to Tokyo, Kyoto and Osaka, and then tend to visit the same tourist spots. So yeah, these are crowded for a reason. They are great locations to visit. Heck, I just put out a video where I visited all 47 prefectures, and 34 out of 47 prefectures see less than 5% of international visitors, with only Tokyo, Kyoto and Osaka and Chiba prefectures seeing numbers above 30%. Looking at Kyoto Prefecture, which includes the city, has a population of about 2.5 million. Some stats say that it drew 32 million overnight guests in 2023 alone, whilst others put the number at 75 million. Not to forget that the majority are domestic tourists. So it's not surprised that spots in the city are crowded with numbers like those, yeah? Gion banned tourists from certain private alleys where geisha work, and for good reason. They are private alleys. And some people were getting a little bit overexcited around spotting geisha. And with Kyoto City's main site spread out in an area about 14 times the size of Manhattan, public transportation, especially the bus system, is being strained, as walking can be hard. But the problem, in my opinion, is infrastructure and crowd control, maybe an unpopular opinion. Many crowded sites have not adapted as tourist numbers have increased. They continue to have the 9 to 5 or the 10 to 5 opening hours, with many having last access half an hour before. You'll find the same number of ticket gates as years past. So one of the problems is trying to squeeze more tourists without changing operation times or adapting ticket gates. And although Kyoto is working to improve things by adding more ticket gates at the station, providing more luggage storage for day trippers, and introducing new tourist-specific buses, it's locations like Hiroshima's Peace Museum that are at the forefront of showing how to adapt for demand. They open from 7:30 in the morning to 7 p.m, with the earlier and later slots only available with prior online reservation, trying to move people away from ticket booths and encouraging them to spread out during the day. Kyoto and Japan as a whole can really learn from this here. It's also becoming increasingly common to have timed entry at tourist sites like observation decks and museums, which in my opinion is not a bad thing either. Part of the solution here is to adapt. So my question when it comes to crowds, is the problem over tourism or is it crowd control? Who is to blame here? The number of tourists entering or the lack of infrastructure? Is it unfair to blanket use the word over-tourism? It really makes it sound like it's a tourist's fault. Problem number 4, the 60 million number. The Japanese government has set a goal of attracting 60 million tourists by 2030, but there's an apparent over-tourism problem, right? Or perhaps a crowd management issue, depending on how you see it, as discussed earlier. So I think you can automatically see the problem. A target of 60 million in a country that is trying to get to grips with the around 35 million that are expected to visit this year. Yet, a target that just doesn't make much sense. Or does it? Japan wants you to travel outside of the Golden Triangle and explore other areas, something that I totally agree you should do. But that's a hard sell, especially for first-time visitors who might have limited time in the country. Even though the Japanese government is trying to attract foreign visitors to rural areas, if Japan wants to spread those 60 million travelers to other areas, there's still a lot of work to do. So I've got some closing thoughts. As you can see, this topic is a complicated one. It comes down to a combination of many factors, including the mindset of a country which simply hasn't fully adjusted for the number of tourists it's attracting. I also don't think that the Japan Rail Pass price increase did the country any favors, and it's likely that people are simply sticking to Tokyo, Osaka and Kyoto route, paying individual trips, and are simply not being enticed to some of the many easily accessible locations that the original JR Pass used to attract. It's difficult to find any specific stats regarding the JR Pass after the increase, but 20 prefectures have seen a decline in tourists, whilst the share of visitors staying in Tokyo, Osaka and Kyoto have increased from around 62.7% in 2019 to 72.1%. Japan's goal of attracting 60 million tourists seems confusing, and even though I at times think that certain areas in Japan has more of a crowd control problem, this will become a real problem soon. Anyway team, as always, what are your thoughts? Full-on over-tourism, localized over-tourism, crowd control, lack of infrastructure or something else? Comment, but please be nice even if you disagree. Stay positive and be a happy gaijin. Till next time, bye.